David Cole was a man with everything money could buy, but his heart was empty. Since his wife Anna died, the mansion he lived in had turned into nothing but walls and silence. Every corner reminded him of what he had lost. His twin sons Ben and Sam had not laughed in months. They barely spoke. Most days they just sat, staring at nothing. David spent his days at work in downtown Detroit, drowning himself in meetings, contracts, and numbers. At night he returned to the Cole family house, where the air felt heavy, where his children's silence cut deeper than any business problem. He thought he had done everything right. He hired specialists, doctors, and therapists. None of them worked. His sons stayed trapped in their small world of grief. David himself became a ghost, moving from one room to another without purpose. Then Mary arrived. She was not like the others. She came as a maid, meant to clean, cook, and keep the house in order. She was quiet, respectful, and gentle. David barely noticed her the first week. To him, she was just another worker who would come and go. But Ben and Sam noticed her. Something about her presence pulled at them, though David was too lost in his own sorrow to see it yet. One afternoon, David came home earlier than expected. A big meeting had been canceled, and for the first time in months, he decided not to fill the empty hours with more work. His driver dropped him at the mansion. As he stepped inside, the house was strangely quiet, yet something felt different. He walked up the stairs slowly, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. His hand tightened on the doorknob of his bedroom. That room had been sacred, a place he hadn't touched since Anna's death. He braced himself for the familiar cold. But when he opened the door, the sight stopped him in his tracks. His bed, once lifeless and untouched, was alive. It shook under the weight of movement. Laughter filled the room. Real laughter. Mary was there, on the bed, bouncing with Ben and Sam. Her dark hair flew as she laughed, her face bright with joy. Ben clung to her arm, squealing with delight, while Sam jumped high, his little hands reaching for the ceiling. David froze in the doorway. His chest tightened. For months he had prayed to hear this sound, the sound of his sons laughing again. And now it was here, in his own bedroom, but not because of him, because of her. Mary didn't notice him at first. She held Ben steady as he wobbled mid-jump. Sam collapsed into her side, giggling so hard he could barely breathe. She wrapped an arm around him, her laughter mixing with theirs. "That's what happens when you don't bend your knees, little man. You have to bounce with rhythm," she teased gently. Her voice was warm. It filled the room with a softness David hadn't felt since Anna. His sons clung to her like she was their safe place. Then it happened. Sam, cheeks red from laughter, pressed his face into Mary's shoulder. His voice came out soft but clear. "Mommy," he whispered. The words stabbed through the air. David staggered a step back, his grip tightening on the doorframe. His heart hammered in his chest. Mary froze. Ben's laughter faded. The room went silent except for Sam's small breaths. He held her tighter, as if she truly was his mother. Mary didn't correct him. She didn't pull away. She simply held him closer, her eyes wide, her lips parted in shock. Slowly she looked up and met David's gaze. Their eyes locked. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just looked at him with something deeper than words, an understanding of what his children had lost and what they were reaching for now. David's throat burned. He wanted to shout, to demand what she thought she was doing in his bed with his sons, but no anger came. No fury rose inside him. Instead, something else filled him. Something fragile, terrifying, and unfamiliar. Hope. He hadn't felt it since Anna died. Yet here it was creeping back into his chest, as his son clung to this woman and whispered the word he thought he would never hear again. Ben, not noticing the storm in the air, bounced again. "Again, Mary," he shouted, his voice tangled with joy. Sam lifted his head slightly and giggled, still holding Mary's hand. David stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching the impossible unfold in front of him. His sons, broken for so long, were alive again, and it was because of her. Mary finally helped the boys down from the bed. She smoothed Sam's hair, still holding his hand. Then her gaze flickered to David once more. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The look on her face told him everything. She hadn't done this for him. She had done it for the boys. David's chest ached. He wanted to say something, but no words came. The only sound in the room was the echo of his son's laughter, louder than grief, louder than silence, louder than the fear that ruled their home. For the first time in months, David didn't feel like he was standing in a tomb. He felt something stir inside him, something he thought had died with Anna. And it terrified him.
The night after the mommy moment, David could not sleep. He sat in his study with the lights dim, staring at the whiskey glass in his hand but never drinking from it. His thoughts circled like a storm. He should have been furious. A maid had crossed into his bedroom, played with his children on the very bed where Anna once slept, and now one of his sons had called her mommy. By every rule he lived by, Mary should have been fired on the spot. But he had seen something he could not deny. His children were laughing. They were alive again. He had tried everything, therapists, doctors, special programs, yet none of them had worked. And now this ordinary woman had brought light back into their eyes. David leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. He hated the conflict inside him. He hated that he needed her. The days that followed only deepened his struggle. He began watching Mary quietly, at first from doorways, later from closer distances. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary, folding laundry, cooking simple meals, tidying toys, but she turned each task into something alive. She sang while she worked, made the socks talk in silly voices, and used pancake batter to teach Ben and Sam how to count. The boys adored her. They followed her around the house, tugging at her sleeves, begging for stories. For the first time since Anna's death, they began to speak more words. Little words, but enough to melt David's guarded heart. One afternoon, David stood silently in the doorway of the playroom. Mary sat on the floor with the twins, a box of crayons between them. "What color is your favorite?" she asked, holding up a broken blue crayon. "Green," Sam said quickly, pointing. "Yellow," Ben added, grabbing one. Mary laughed softly and drew a crooked smiley face on the paper. "This is Mr. Sunny. He only smiles when you share." The boys nodded seriously. Moments later, Ben handed Sam the yellow crayon without being asked. David's chest tightened. He had begged for months to see this kind of kindness from them. He had hired experts who pushed and demanded, but the boys never responded. Yet here they were, giving freely to Mary, as if she had unlocked something deep inside them. David stepped back before anyone noticed him. He felt like a stranger in his own house. That night, while pacing his study, he opened a drawer he hadn't touched in months. Inside was a framed photo of Anna. He stared at her smiling face, the same smile he had not allowed himself to remember since the funeral. "You would have loved her," he whispered bitterly. "She's doing what I couldn't." A week later, Dr. Harris, the boys' pediatric doctor, came for a scheduled check. David was eager for him to see the progress. He wanted proof that what he had witnessed was real. When David announced the visit, Mary looked uneasy. She said, "Maybe it's too soon. They're still fragile." But David shook his head. "They're ready." When Dr. Harris arrived, clipboard in hand, the warmth in the house seemed to vanish. The boys froze under his cold questions. When asked to repeat words, they stayed silent. When prompted to show the signs Mary had taught them, they turned away. "Lift your hand, Ben," Dr. Harris said sharply, adjusting the boy's posture. Ben burst into tears. Sam buried his face into Mary's lap. David's stomach twisted as he watched. After 15 minutes, the doctor stood and scribbled notes.
"Mr. Cole, I understand the excitement, but this is anecdotal improvement at best. Emotional bonding, not real progress. Don't build expectations on weak ground." The words struck David like a hammer. After Dr. Harris left, David turned on Mary. "You told me they were better," he said, his voice low but sharp. "They are better," Mary answered, steady but hurt. "One bad moment doesn't erase what you've seen." "Don't patronize me," David snapped. "You gave me false hope. You made me believe in something that wasn't real." Mary's face fell. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "False hope," she repeated quietly. "David, you heard them laugh. You saw them smile." But his pride and shame drowned her words. "You're the help, Mary, nothing more." The silence after that was heavy. Mary did not argue. She only nodded once, gathered the boys, and led them upstairs. From that moment, the house fell cold again. Mary continued to work, but her warmth was gone. She spoke only when necessary. No silly sock voices, no dancing in the kitchen, no songs at bedtime. The boys felt it too. They clung to her silently, refusing to laugh. Their new words disappeared. Their eyes dimmed. David noticed the change like a knife to his chest, but he couldn't bring himself to apologize. His pride kept him silent even as the mansion filled with the heavy quiet once more. Nights grew unbearable. David sat in his study, staring at the photo of Anna, haunted by the memory of Ben calling Mary Mommy, haunted by Sam's laughter. He had broken something fragile, and he didn't know how to fix it. One evening, he returned home early. From the hallway, he heard faint music drifting from the kitchen. He followed the sound, his heart pounding. Inside, Mary stood barefoot, the small speaker on the counter playing a cheerful tune. Ben and Sam clapped along, stomping their feet. For the first time in weeks, laughter filled the air again. Mary hesitated, as if ready to turn the music off. But then Ben tugged her hand. "Dance," he shouted. She gave in. She twirled, pulling the boys into a circle. Their squeals filled the kitchen. David froze in the doorway, his chest aching. Then Ben spotted him and signed clumsily with his little hands. "Dance, Papa," he said. Sam joined, his eyes wide with hope. David's throat closed. He wanted to retreat, to keep his walls up, but the boys were waiting. Mary was watching too, her gaze guarded but open, offering him a choice. Slowly, David stepped forward. "Okay," he whispered. He raised his hands awkwardly, trying to copy their movements. His steps were stiff, clumsy, almost laughable, but the boys screamed with delight. Mary's eyes softened, her lips curving into a small smile. For the first time in months, David danced, with his children, with his maid, with his grief. And the mansion trembled with life again.
2 weeks passed after that night in the kitchen. Something had changed inside the Cole family house. It was small at first, Ben humming while playing with blocks, Sam tugging at David's sleeve to show him a picture he drew. But to David, these little things were like miracles. Still, the wound between him and Mary remained. They worked in the same house, spoke when necessary, but there was distance. She had not forgotten his cruel words, "You're the help, nothing more," and he had not found the courage to take them back. One evening, David sat alone in his study. The house was quiet again, but this time it was not grief, it was fear. Fear that Mary might leave, fear that his sons would sink back into the darkness without her. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter he had written months after Anna died, but never sent. In it, he confessed his deepest fear, that he would never be enough for Ben and Sam. His hands shook as he held it. For so long he had hidden this pain, but now, watching the change in his children, he realized he could not heal without facing it. Taking a deep breath, David walked down the hall. He stopped in front of Mary's small room. His knuckles tapped the door lightly. Mary opened it, surprised.
She wore a simple shirt, her hair tied back. "Mr. Cole?" she asked softly. "Please," David said, his voice rough. "Call me David." He handed her the letter. "Read this," he whispered. Mary sat on the edge of the bed and read. Her eyes moved slowly, carefully. By the time she reached the end, tears shimmered in her eyes. She looked up at him. "You were hurting so badly," she whispered. David's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. "This is not weakness," Mary said gently, standing. She placed her hand lightly over his chest. "This is love. You stayed. You tried. Anna would be proud of you, not for being rich, not for being perfect, but because you didn't give up." Her words broke something inside him. For the first time, David felt seen, not as a billionaire, not as a widower, but as a father fighting to hold on. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. "Thank you," he whispered. Mary returned the letter to him. There was no hug, no romance, only a silence filled with dignity. David left her room, the letter clutched in his hand, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. The next day, spring sunlight warmed the yard. Mary had set up a path of colorful ribbons across the grass, calling it the Dragon Trail. Ben and Sam ran with wild laughter, chasing the ribbons as the wind carried them. David stood on the porch, his arms folded. He told himself he was only watching, but inside something deeper pulled at him. Then Sam tripped and rolled on the grass, laughing so hard his little body shook. Ben turned, eyes shining, and lifted his hands. He signed clumsily but clearly, "Come, Papa." The words struck David harder than anything in his life. His coffee cup slipped from his hand, landing on the steps. He didn't care. His legs moved before he realized it. He ran, stumbling on the grass like a man who had forgotten how to move freely. The twins squealed with delight and ran toward him. He dropped to his knees, scooping them into his arms. Tears burst from his eyes, not silent tears, but loud, broken sobs. He pressed his face into their shoulders, clinging as if they were his lifeline. "Papa's here," he choked out. "Papa's here." Mary stood at the edge of the yard, her hand pressed to her chest. She did not move closer. She simply watched, her own eyes wet, giving the moment fully to them. For the first time since Anna's death, David did not feel like a man failing. He felt like a father again. Weeks turned into months. The mansion was no longer quiet and heavy. It was alive. Crayon marks smudged the walls, toy cars littered the hallways, laughter echoed from room to room. David found himself changing too. His phone often died from being forgotten while he played pirates with Sam or let Ben style his hair with colorful clips. Mary's presence had shifted from the background to the very center of the home. The staff smiled more, the boys laughed freely, and David, for the first time in years, hosted people at the house. One warm Saturday evening, neighbors and old friends filled the yard. Folding chairs, lemonade, mismatched tablecloths. Ben darted about in a blue cape, calling himself Captain Ben. Sam wore a pirate hat, demanding everyone search for his treasure box, which was full of cookies. David stood under a tree, watching with quiet awe. He saw Anna in the boys, not in sadness, but in life. She would have loved this chaos. She would have thanked Mary for giving it back to them. Mary stood on the porch, laughing with a neighbor, wearing a simple dress the boys had chosen online. She looked like the very heart of the home. David walked over slowly, stopping beside her. "You brought them back to me," he said softly. His voice shook. "And you brought me back to them." Mary smiled, wavered, her eyes glistening. She placed her hand on his arm. "They never left, David. They were just waiting for you to look again." He swallowed hard. "And me?" Her gaze did not waver. "You were worth waiting for too. They did not kiss. They didn't need to.
The moment itself was enough. "Papa!" Ben shouted from the yard, waving. "Mama Mary! Blanket time!" Mary's eyes flickered to David, searching for hesitation, but there was none. He smiled and nodded. Together they walked to the blanket under the tree. The twins jumped onto it, dragging them down. David lay back with Sam curled against his chest, while Mary sat with Ben at her side. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full. As the sun set, turning the sky gold, David looked at the woman who had saved his family, and at the children who had saved him. For the first time, family didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a promise.